My name is Rory Hawkins, but I'm better known as my artist name Catlanta. I've been living and painting in Atlanta basically my entire life. I think the big thing for me is that when you're working in a new environment, you learn to love your local art supply stores and what you're used to. Because whenever, especially if you go out of country, you never know exactly what you're gonna get into when it comes to paint or paint supply, or whether you can source certain things. And also in Costa Rica, we ran into a lot of issues with whether or not water was going to be on a certain day, which made cleaning up afterwards a little bit difficult. But I find that when you paint most any mural, you end up kind of running into obstacles along the way. And half of the project of when you're painting a mural is kind of problem solving to figure out how to get your design that you created in a small format usually onto a wall. And I think working in a new environment adds to that difficulty, but it also comes with the territory of doing public art. Like when we were in Italy, it was like, well, you go to this place for the plate for printing, you know, like you go to the ink store, and then you go to the paint store. You want to do like bookbinding, go to the leather store, you know, like it was just all over the place. But convenience for sure. I mean, it was fun to kind of go through some of those small, really niche stores and dig through their dusty old stuff. But when you're trying to get something done, it's also nice to just have a place. That I'm not sure of. I'm still kind of figuring it out. I think for me, especially with the birth of my daughter, this past year has been kind of figuring out how to turn this into more of a career, even though it has been my career and my job for the past few years, trying to figure out ways to make it more sustainable and keep me going through the lean times and the hard times the same way as when, you know, I have a ton of projects and work. So I don't have a clear defined vision, but ultimately I think I'd like to try and move into either curating more shows or maybe eventually trying to build a space of my own where I could hold creative events and gallery shows and stuff like that. It feels like with our city, so many of those places have either drastically changed or moved over the years, which may not be the best thing to try and dive into, but it also seems I kind of have the stubbornness to maybe get in there and try and build out a space. Who knows? Probably painting a lot more cats, but for the long-term vision, I could see a creative space, whether that's a gallery or a coffee shop or something like that, somewhere along the line, I think would be a dream. Yeah. I just want a creative space of some sort, especially getting kicked out of all these other places, just to have a space. Have you seen, there's this guy in Portland, I think his name is Mike Bennett, who does, you know, it's kind of lowbrow art, but like he's opened up his own like mini golf. It's like a mini golf restaurant, but it's just like covered in his own artwork. Something like that like is interesting to me, where it becomes a destination of its own, but also is not owned by a corporate entity, which so many of those things are now. So when I talk about Atlanta or cities in general, I think about making magic, and that what makes cities unique are like people that come in and make their own magic and don't really have a purpose. Or they maybe have a purpose, but it's not like clear defined. What's your business plan? What's your bottom line? Why are you trying to save up for money to get a vacation home? Or it's just people that come in and do their own thing, or have done the same thing for 50, you know, like people love Manuel's Tavern, not because it's an incredible restaurant, but because it's the same and because they are committed to doing it a certain way. If I could figure out how to bring my art and my like passion into a space that's more like a physical space that people could visit, then I think that would be a goal or a vision. But I don't have any business sense, so that's where the problem comes in. I mean, I think every project is its own beast in a way. I don't think I'm really good at defining roles. Like I'll just take on everything for a project and like source it all, find my own printer, or sometimes just print stuff myself. So yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into anything, whether if I'm painting a sign, I'll make the patterns myself. There's just a lot that goes into it. This is my like studio space, but I also have a little wood workshop at my house where I do cutting of all the pieces, because a lot of my work involves wood cutouts and stuff like that, and that has its own complications, and it's almost kind of creating two pieces. Like I have to get it right on the saw first and get it all cleaned up and sanded and ready for paint, and then have to kind of go in and create a whole piece on top of that surface. So it's a lot, there's a lot, and I'm trying to be better about like tracking my time and seeing how much work I'm putting into pieces, but also that ends up being a little depressing over time when you realize that if I were to actually charge or get a normal hourly rate for this piece, then no one's probably ever gonna buy it. So it's one of the things you always kind of struggle with, is trying to figure out how to create work that you're proud of, but also that you don't destroy yourself trying to create. So most recently, I think, was putting together a solo show in like 2-3 months. Was kind of a huge endeavor for me, especially with it being my first ever solo show, debut solo show. And there were definitely a lot of complications that came out of that, but it taught me to trust in myself and to kind of commit to something. I think I have a tendency to like overwork a piece or like really zero in on the fine details. And I still was happy with the work to where it was plenty of the details were there and everything, but I didn't have the time to stop and like take a day and just keep painting the same spot over and over again. And it also taught me, it gave me kind of like an itch or an urge to kind of start thinking about future events or like future ways that I could create a space or an event or a moment with my artwork in ways that I think I haven't really tapped into yet. Kind of agreeing with some developers or people that don't necessarily know what they're looking for and kind of want to overcommit on what's possible with paint, or mainly like ladders or safety equipment. So I tend to be a little more cautious going into jobs with people that maybe aren't so art focused or safety focused, and kind of making sure I have a better understanding of what I'm getting into before accepting certain projects. I mean, my earliest inspiration was definitely my father. He was an art teacher, and he would take me to museums and gallery shows and art events and lots of things that at the time I don't think I really appreciated quite as much, or was just like, ugh, this again. But looking back, I'm really glad that he shared those experiences with me. And he had a very like bold graphic style. He did a lot of screen printing when he was younger and things like that. So I think a lot of that like basis and foundation was laid with him. I don't think I have I have a few artists that I really like am drawn to. Like I really like Chris Ware. I like a lot of like graphic novels and kind of indie comics, and have drawn a lot of inspiration from that style. Just like very bold colors, usually like not a ton of shading, and you know, just kind of like, I like graphic stuff and very like clean lines, clean colors, and kind of figuring out how to create compositions and scenes without rendering it too realistically, but coming in where you understand what you're looking at. So again, I think sometimes I feel like I'm more inspired by graphic design than I am art itself, and sometimes feel like maybe I'm better labeled a designer than an artist, but I think that's kind of where my inspiration comes from. I went to Georgia State for art and design, and while I was there, I was working at Paws Atlanta, which is a no-kill animal shelter, and basically ended up fostering 2 cats that really couldn't go anywhere else. Their names were Cheeks and Sterling, and they both had FIV, so they could basically only live with cats with FIV, and they couldn't go outside or anything like that. And because they were older cats, no one really wanted them, so I ended up 21-year-old Rory with these 2 kind of large, somewhat sick cats, but they weren't really that sick. And so just while I was at school, I would end up drawing little sketches of them and kind of simplified it and simplified it and simplified it till it just became like a 3-legged cat with a heart on his chest. The cats had 4 legs, but it was just like where it came from. And you know, people would see it in my sketchbooks and whatnot and say like, hey, that would look really good on a shirt. So I noticed that people were like connecting with that a lot more than the stuff that I was making in art school at the time. And so just by being around people who were making art one night we were walking to a bar, and my friend handed me a can of spray paint. We spray painted some things, and I was really proud of everything that I had done, but people just connected to the cat. And so, I think there's a point where, I don't want to say I make artwork for other people, but there's a point where when your artwork connects with people, and you don't always get to choose what that subject matter is, and you don't always get to choose what people are going to relate to. And for me, people really related to the cats. And being right out of school when it kind of started to take off, I was really looking for kind of that reason to create and that drive to be an artist. And I think the cats were an easy way for me to give myself assignments to create or to paint a cat or to put something out, where I think I might have lost some of that if I didn't have that motivation right out of school. Because when I was in school, one of the things that stuck with me the most was someone being like, if you graduate and you're not back in a studio within 6 months, this path's probably not for you. Which is kind of over the top, but at the same time, there are a lot of people that I went to school with for art who, once they left school, never picked up a brush again or really followed any creative pursuits. So I think there's something there. But yeah, I think for me, the cats and I are kind of I'm known as Catlanta, but the cats to me kind of have their own personality, and I just kind of am the vessel to which the cats come into the world, I guess. Yeah, so I think at first it started as me painting the cat, and then I think in order to preserve the appeal of it to myself, to keep myself interested in the project, I've kind of moved past thinking of it as a cat necessarily, and more of the cat shape is a blank canvas for me, and trying to kind of push what I can do with that shape, but also what I can get away with calling a cat. And now it's to the point where most of them don't really share any characteristics with actual cats, but they've kind of become their own being, which is kind of what I was going for anyways. So I know a lot of people tie it into cats, especially when it is called Catlanta, but to me it's kind of its own creature at this point. It's made me a lot quicker. Yeah, I think it's just helped me stay focused a little bit more. It's also kind of confirmed to me that this is what I want to do and this is what I like to do, because time is so limited now, because we're doing majority of the childcare while she's this age. So at the end of the night when she's down, I still want to go and paint. I still want to, work on the projects that I'm working on. I think becoming a father has just kind of focused me on what I want to do. It's kind of pushing me to kind of think about bigger long-term goals. Everyone has that desire to be I want to be the cool dad, I want to be the cool parent. So there's also that too, I want to be able to show her that you can make it as a creative in this world. And it's not going to be easy, and I don't know that I want to push you down the path, but I want to show you that it's possible and that there's people that make a life and a living kind of following their passions and pursuits. We always joked that because I make fun, colorful cats, that she's going to end up being just the darkest, most goth, all black paintings, or the flip side with her mom being a creative as well, just become an accountant or something, and just no offense to accountants or goths, but just kind of the opposite of what we do. So we'll see. It could backfire on us completely. You can just show them all you can, but it's up to them ultimately. I don't know, for me, I think Atlanta has always felt kind of in between a big city and a small town. And it has an accessibility to it that I think other places don't, where obviously the goal for a lot of artists is to get out of Atlanta and to, go to these other places, but at the same time it feels like a path in New York, you have to do it the New York way, and you have to do it a certain, you have to kill yourself to go up there and give it your all to do it a certain way that's already been established there. Where Atlanta, especially its art scene, has never really been established. And as a result, a lot of weird things come out of it, which is what I like. And you have the convergence of a bunch of different cultures that are kind of playing off of each other or working together or inspiring each other. And to me, it just feels like a city that if you want to push yourself and put yourself out there, that you have a captive audience that is excited and interested in having culture in their city, of various different varieties. It's not controlled by one group, and it's not controlled by one thought process or one style. So it's just, you know, it's a great city to see a bunch of different perspectives and a bunch of different styles and a bunch of different cultures and diversity. Like, it's just, when I go to outside of Atlanta, I'm often like kind of bored or feel like I'm in a place that just has one aesthetic or style or culture that kind of controls all of it, where Atlanta just feels, again, like go from neighborhood to neighborhood and each one has its own distinct style and characteristics, and it's just a place that even 20, 30 years later, I still feel like I'm discovering new spots and new places and new people, and it just feels kind of wild in a way. Like, it doesn't, you know, like with all the trees and all the vegetation, like it just doesn't feel like anyone has control of the city. Granted, the like funding for the arts and culture is abysmal, but because of that, I think you see a lot of really inspiring things from people who are really passionate about what they do and who have chosen to live here not because of that funding, but because they love this place, they love the people, and I think it's just really nice. And with the impending climate doom, I think we're in a good spot being in the Piedmont region, so, you know, there's always that too. I think for me, the big learning curve and experience was trying to like come to terms with what I think of as an artist, or what's been like portrayed as an artist, and like the actual work that it takes to do artwork or to share your work. And of course, again, it depends on how you want to make it. There's plenty of people that are fine with, you know, making work in a very not controlled chaos, you know, like just really coming through with their passion. But I feel like it's a rarity more often than not that you can come into the studio late at night and sling paint around and come up with a masterpiece. Like, that just doesn't really exist. There's a lot of like work that goes into it. So for me, it was coming to terms and realizing that in the same way people practice an instrument or practice sports, so much artwork is just practicing and doing it over again and doing it over again and doing it over again, and really building up that experience from projects or pieces or whatever, you know. But for me, the cats were also really good for that as well, because it kind of taught me how to paint. I focused a lot on like printmaking and other mediums in college, and had a little bit of experience with painting, but doing 1,000 cats eventually will teach you how to paint a little bit better than you did when you first started it. It's just kind of staying immersed in it really ultimately will help you build as an artist. Working around other people will help you build as an artist, and just putting yourself out there. That idea of like an undiscovered creative being found, like a patron, you know, that just doesn't really exist. So it is a lot of hard work, and it's just a lot of kind of doing the same thing over and over again, and ultimately believing in yourself, because there's so many days that, or weeks, where you're just like questioning why you do what you do. And you come through those weeks and you are reminded again of why you do what you do, and you love it all over again. But it's definitely not a straight line, and it's not a flat path to get there. But it's just that, again, like, I know arts and sports don't get compared that often, but just kind of like that, like digging in and just like, again, trusting the process and knowing that every project ultimately kind of you can learn from and build from. And that's why, you know, I do a lot of cats, but I also do a lot of like sign painting or chalkboard work and stuff like that. And it's not necessarily usually the most interesting projects, but I've also learned a lot from them, and I've learned a lot of technique from them. So I think looking at any opportunity where you can be creative, that it can be a learning opportunity, or that you could develop your skills or techniques from it, is the way to go. And, you know, as long as you're not bogging yourself down with projects that you don't want to do, then I think there's something to be learned from most creative endeavors. I think collaborating is nice, because I think the public-facing part of art is that you show your artwork in a gallery space where there's hopefully hundreds of people that come through and see the work. But the reality is that I could go a week without talking to anyone if I didn't, you know, if I was just in my studio the whole time. So collaboration is really nice to be able, one, to just work with someone and talk with them at the same time, but also like, I think again, you get a lot in your head. One, self-doubt, but also just there's a lot of just day-to-day aspects of making art and making it a career and your job, where it's just nice to be able to relate to other people who understand what you're going through. That's the most basic nice part about collaboration. But then I think the other thing is learning techniques, just seeing how other people work. I mean, I think it teaches you a lot. Most people have some form of art training, but a lot of it is stuff that you pick up along the way or that you have figured out for yourself to work out. But you know, like when I go to a mural festival and I'm painting alongside 5 different people, 4 of them are gonna have different ways that they approach their wall. And it might work for them, it might not work for me, but sometimes, usually, there's like an in-between that kind of works for me and could work for them, you know? And so learning that, and then also just the energy, I think, when you're around, and that's why previously I've never had a studio space, but one of my favorite parts about having a studio space is just being surrounded by people who are creating. And there's an energy that really can't be matched to that. Again, I think part of it goes back to like kind of the loneliness of being an artist, and kind of having people around you creating at the same time kind of could be a motivator to me and kind of remind me that I'm not in it alone when sometimes it feels like it. Oh yeah, I do. I mean, there's definitely days where I'm like very excited when no one is at the studio. But then there's some days where I'm like, oh, I don't feel like doing this today. And it's like, okay, it's good that there's someone here. But there are definitely, probably more often than not, I'm glad people are here. I don't think I have anything like specifically, but I am working with a few like local city organizations and groups on a few projects, which I always love. Working with Marta on a project, which is always fun, just to kind of, I think that's the other thing that I love about working in Atlanta, is kind of growing up and seeing these brands or these institutions or organizations, and then having them reach out to say, hey, we would love for you to create logos or create a design that either supports us or works with us or re-envisions kind of our branding or visual identity. And so it's fun to do that. You know, like it's cool to grow up seeing Marta all your life and then have them reach out and say, hey, would you like to work with us on a project? And you get to kind of leave your mark on the identity of the city in a way. Right now, I'm just kind of going into the holiday phase of the year, which is kind of more focused on like individual sales and making ornaments and t-shirts and all that stuff, which is fun, but can be a little more administrative and less creative. The creative will happen now, and then I'll spend the next 2 months trying to work with printers and distributors and all kinds of other stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have for the rest of the year. Yeah, lots of holiday stuff. So I think I just started one year wanting to make a sweater looking sweatshirt, but knew that I wasn't going to be able to source a whole sweater. And then from there, I've kind of just, it's kind of been similar to the way that I make cats. At this point, it's like, instead of trying to sell the same sweater every year, I like to push myself to create a new design that usually ties into the year that's happening or something going on in Atlanta. There's been like construction ones, years that we've had heavy construction, or a peach drop cat last year was Waffle House. So it's just kind of a continuation of creating work, or in this case merch, that kind of speaks to the city in a way that is visually appealing to someone that may not know what exactly they're looking at, but also to someone who does know and is from the city. They're like, oh yeah, that's the peach drop, you know? Which to me, having been in Atlanta all my life, feels like something everyone knows about. But then you quickly realize not that many people know about it, and you know, it's definitely a small thing that makes us unique, for better or worse. You know, the hiding and leaving them out aspect kind of, I think for me, like, it kind of gets lumped into this, well, you're just leaving your work out for free. Like, why would you do that? You know, like, who gets it? You know, like, what ends up happening? What if no one gets it? You know, and for me, it's kind of just part of a whole process. And to me, the cat is like, kind of this one piece that I can share with someone. One person is going to have the experience of finding it. All the other people are going to have the experience of being let down, which makes me feel bad. But also, while you're looking for it, it's going to inspire like feelings of excitement or, you know, high energy, and it becomes its own thing to where like if you've never gone and hunted for one of my cats and you've never actually experienced the artwork, because that's the process of it, you know, and it's finding the location, it's knowing where to go. It's what seems like a simple gesture is a simple gesture, but at the same time, it's meant to be a way for me to connect with someone that I probably have never met in my life and may never even see again. But I still have, every time I do a mural out in Atlanta or I do a gallery show, I have people who come up and say, I found this cat 6 years ago, and they still have a very vivid memory of it. And I may not even remember the cat sometimes. Usually I do. I pretty much remember most of them. But to me, it's a way that I can create a connection with a stranger in a way that I would never be able to otherwise. And that like cat is a vessel for me to share like kindness and just like a moment that kind of takes you out of reality and the world around you. And you're just focused on finding a small cat, which doesn't make sense to people. Like if you try to explain it to someone else, it's not gonna make sense. If they don't participate, it's not gonna make sense. But to me, in like my day-to-day life, I can definitely be negative, as all people can, but this is like my one way of just sharing positivity with the world in a way that, again, I can't connect with people like that, like walking down the street. So again, it's kind of like an alternate world. If I can convince you to come out and look for a cat, you're probably gonna have an experience one way or another, whether you meet a new person, whether you find a new place, whether you find the cat and get really excited. It's just kind of an invitation to just participate. I think when we participate in the world around us, then we end up having a lot better experience than just kind of staying in our own bubble sometimes. Again, I'm probably like, there's definite downsides to like giving away a lot of your work. And as you can see, like my studio walls are fairly blank because most of what I have is wrapped up in other places, and I don't have a whole lot of things. But I think for me, I kind of say in the art world, you're essentially going to be doing a lot of work for free, whether you like it or not. And I've kind of taken control of that. If I'm being asked to do a work in a gallery show, I'm creating that work for free in the hopes that someone will potentially buy it, but that's a process and that's a whole thing that requires a lot of work. So while yes, I am giving away the work for free, it's helped me build a community and a fan base around the work that people end up getting tired of hunting for cats, or they're not in the area and they'll commission me for work or ask me for prints of the work and whatnot. So in a way, it creates kind of an exclusivity to the cat that when I make it kind of difficult in our system, if you have the money, I can buy this and I'm gonna take this. But I've made it to where you can't buy it unless I decide you can buy a version of it, but usually it's not original painting or whatnot. So it doesn't make sense to the system that we have set up in place, but at the same time, I don't know that I necessarily want it to work with the systems that we have in place. I think there's kind of like a stigma associated with something being free, as that it's either like a trap or that it's not worthy of not worthy of being purchased, or that it's not worth anything. But to me, being able to share the work in this way, and once I leave a cat out, I leave it and I walk away and I'm fine with that. I don't sit there like handing out business cards or, saying, if you like that cat, you should come to my, I know it doesn't make sense and it doesn't tie in with like a business model, but at the same time, I think some of the things that I've been most inspired by in my life, and some of the artists that have been most inspired by my life, are those people who create to create, and they don't create with a bottom line in mind or a vision of where this is going to take them. I mean, I think the older I've gotten and the more bills I've gotten, then the more open I am to selling work. But again, I think there's a certain magic to the individual cats that I make to where I don't really ever sell them like that. And there's certain designs that you're never gonna see on a shirt, and they're only can be gotten by actively going out and participating in that moment and in that time, and that's for the person that finds it. That's the magic and that's the moment. I don't know if it can be replicated on a t-shirt necessarily, so. For me, I don't think I'm like as, I feel like I see some takes on AI where like people act like terrified, and perhaps I'm, you know, sitting on the beach while the hurricane comes in and I'm just not realizing that it's going to be a really bad storm. But for me, it feels like there's a path forward that could respect both the creator and work with the technology that we have, because at the end of the day, I do feel like art is created in a time, and artists often use technology that exists at the time to advance their techniques and their styles, and what people have been able to imagine is possible to be created by a human before. But obviously AI takes a lot of that away. But I think for now, it seems like AI, if you want to like get a digital image of something, it's very easy to do. And I could see why that would be concerning for the art world. But again, I don't see yet a path where, again, like that handmade aspect is going to be replicated by a computer anytime soon. And if it is, then it's going to lose that appeal very quickly. I don't see a world where it completely takes over, but I also do see a world where it may be harder for a artist who doesn't have a name, isn't established, to be able to demand fair wages or fair prices. And I think that's the big concern. But it feels like that's kind of happening in almost every industry, unfortunately. And I think creating art is a much more blue-collar job than a lot of people realize or want to portray it as. And ultimately, unfortunately, with these technological advances, it's often the blue-collar type workers who are quick to be replaced, but then that often leads to bigger problems down the road when the people that have the knowledge or the labor abilities to do this work are replaced by robots. It tends to create bigger, issues for everyone down the road later on. So it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know that I know enough about it. I think I've been kind of keeping my head in the sand because. Sorry.
That's fine. No worries. If you gotta take it, that's cool.
Scam likely. Very important. Yeah, no, I just had to do just set up an LLC for the first time. I didn't know you get like 1 million letters in the mail that are all like, you need to do this, and then in very tiny text, it's like, this is a solicitation. And you're like, oh, God. All right. Yeah. Just a whole new world of scams. I mean, I think if I were to tell an artist what not to do is that, for me, it's been coming to terms with the fact that when I'm creating work or creating things or making cats or putting them out, I always have this idea of a person in my head that is going to not like it or to tell me why it's lame or why it is badly done or why it's silly. And after over a decade of doing these cats, I've never met that person in real life. And so it's always been understanding that that voice is always going to live in your head, and it's always going to tell you that what you're doing is silly or not worth it, but realizing that that's internal instead of external, and realizing that that's part of the struggle of creating and putting yourself out there is to just kind of let go of those feelings. And when you do, I think you open yourself up to a lot more, I don't know, praise is the right word, but you open yourself up a lot more to acceptance and collaboration and just a lot more positivity than the negativity that I think when you're in the process and when you're creating work exist in your head, and that you try and tell yourself that all these bad things are gonna happen by painting a cat, when in reality that's not true. So I think it's just, trusting yourself, even if what you do is paint 1,000 cats, and it might seem silly to the outside and you might not be able to explain it to everyone. When you trust in yourself, the work kind of becomes bigger than you, and that's where the magic of creation happens, and you're able to kind of connect with people that you never thought of, or places or people. And I think that's what keeps me going more than anything, is just that desire to see what's next, and to see where it'll push me, and instead of holding myself back or, saying I can't do it, finally entering a stage of my career where it's like, this sounds fun, let's do this, let's try. And if we fail, which we probably won't, then we'll learn from it, but you know, not holding myself back based off of like hypotheticals or imaginary people that aren't real. So.